There are yet again more questions about President Trump's stability. The president is, of course, knocking all those concerns down, even calling himself a, quote, stable genius. Those are his words. But the book Fire and Fury certainly exposed a lot of very concerning things about his phobias, his inability to concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes, and, well, his temper, of course. There's also a new book out that gets more into this. It's called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, and it takes things one step further. More than 24 mental health professionals question whether his mental condition is dangerous for the country. I recently spoke with one of them, Dr. Stephen Rubel. Well, first, talk about the genesis of this book. How did it come about?
Well, Bandy Lee from Yale, really saw that there was a problem and that in America people were essentially worried about our safety, and she didn't understand how the Goldwater rule was essentially a gag order for psychiatrists, and so she had a conference called the Yale Conference. It was a duty to warn conference where psychiatrists and other mental health workers came to discuss their feelings about what was happening with Trump in office.
Remind everybody, if you could, Doctor, the Goldwater rule and the open question whether or not you guys, in effect, broke the rule in writing the book.
Well, the Goldwater rule was written by the American Psychiatric Association in 1973 in response to what occurred in 1964 when Barry Goldwater was running for office, and many psychiatrists came together to state that he was psychotic. They were giving diagnoses of a man that they had not met with. And so the Goldwater rule, it's an important rule. It makes sure that we don't give diagnoses to people that we haven't met, not just the president, but even anybody that we meet with clinically.
And then clearly, though, in March of last year, there was a re-examination of the rule, right?
Yeah. Right after President Trump comes into office, the APA, out of nowhere, extends this rule that is, again, an important rule to have. But beforehand, we were at least able to educate the public, talk about what we see is happening in a more general sense. But this was essentially a gag order. We weren't able to talk about any behaviors, anything that had to do with his speech. From the psychiatric standpoint, we just couldn't understand the need for it.
Clearly, yourself and some other leading voices in your profession agreed with what the APA did. But how just vociferous is this debate within mental health professionals, whether it's good or not to diagnose someone remotely, let alone the president?
Again, I have to be really clear. We live in a litigious society, and I would say that President Trump is probably right in there of being quite litigious. It would be stupid of us to put a diagnosis in this book, which we did not do. And as you can see, nobody is coming after us to sue anybody in this book, or Macmillan. So it's important not to diagnose President Trump. What we are saying is that he is showing signs of dangerousness. That's why the book is called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. It's not the diagnosis of Donald Trump.
Since I've been talking to other folks, I've heard, and these terms mean more to you than me, but he's a narcissistic personality disorder. He is an extreme present hedonist, sociopath, malignant narcissist. He's on the bipolar spectrum, hypomanic. I could keep going on, delusional disorders, etc. When you hear those things, do you nod appreciably, or do you kind of recoil a little bit, because usually people got to be in the same room when they say the phrases?
I think it's important not to call him any of those things, but to just speak about what we see and know about him, and that's enough to say that he's dangerous. Again, if he was somebody who lived in your neighborhood and he was on the corner spouting what he spouts, it really wouldn't matter, because he didn't have access to something to hurt you. He though has a job where I'm not sure if he has the capacity to do what the job entails, and he has access to weapons of mass destruction.
and if I could, in using that standard of dangerousness versus diagnosis, psychiatrist Alan Francis said the following statement. I'm curious if you agree. The statement is, you can't say enough about how incompetent and unqualified Trump is to be the leader of the free world, but that does not make him mentally ill. Do you agree with that statement? Or clearly people are talking about the 25th Amendment being invoked here. Politically, obviously, people are talking about potentially impeachment, especially given where the Russia probe is. But should we feel afraid, or is there something maybe more? And I know we'll get into the daddy issues in a second, but that statement I read from Francis, do you agree with it?
Well, I don't think that Dr. Francis is right to say that he's not mentally ill. I'm not saying that he is or he isn't. We haven't determined that. But for us to evaluate his dangerousness is apparent. Most people who are mentally ill are not dangerous. That's important. And most people who are dangerous are not mentally ill. So it's this conflation of the two terms is inappropriate. So Dr. Francis, I think, misses the mark here in saying that he's not. It's not important whether he is or he isn't. He is dangerous enough now to have people around him being concerned and to hopefully have an evaluation to figure out what is happening.
Listen, I could talk forever about this.
Me too.
Again, the book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, it's a bestseller in the New York Times. Doctor, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. It was great. Thanks.
Coming up next, we'll take a look at some local headlines, so please stay with us.